This Thursday, March 8th, 2018. I want to make the announcement that Heather Payne and Ray DeBose will be absent this evening. By the way, for visitors, we're having renovations done to the HVAC system, and the restroom is not accessible on this floor, so you need to go up the stairs and to the left and follow the signs to find the restrooms. To the board members, does any board member know of a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? All right, looks good. First call on Barbara Fouché for an announcement.
The Human Resources Committee will meet on Monday, March 19, 2018 at 4:30 p.m. in OWASA's boardroom to continue discussing retiree health benefits for new hires and deferred compensation 457 plan. Thank you.
All right. John Young.
The Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee met on February 26th, and our attendees were Heather, Rushir, John, and me from the committee, plus Jeff and Ray. So we had 6 and 9 board members, which was nice. We also had Dr. Greg Shiraklis, who is a professor at UNC who's been doing a lot of research on resiliency of water, sort of region-wide water systems, and has spoken to this board or members of this board before, plus 2 members of his research team. So our topic was drought response operating protocol. The specific focus seems to be about under what conditions, what drought conditions OWASA would access its Jordan Lake allocation or would not access, restrict itself from accessing that lake. And I think the general consensus is we're trying to achieve a balance of 2 goals. One is to be sustainable, live within our means, that kind of thing, promote conservation against the price of the cost, I should say, to our customers of restrictions that would be put in place from drought. We'd like to avoid that, or some severe drought that would cause a shortage of water. So the question is really, where is the balancing point between those forces? And we haven't resolved that. We've asked the staff to develop some more data analysis to support a potential policy change that we would recommend to the board, and we agreed to meet again with that information. Perhaps we'd do it in conjunction with the long-range water supply planning because these issues are a bit related. So there are comments from other board members who were there, questions from those who weren't, anything?
Thank you, John. John Morse had a few issues. Do you like to bring up?
Much. I think it would add to our deliberations if we had a place that would be on our agenda every meeting when board members could make very brief announcements about things they've learned that might be useful to the board, or suggest something that might be on a future agenda. I'm thinking about something that would not take much time, but it would kind of let us get in communication with each other informally on things. So, there's I think the question is where to put that. And I've noticed that at the end of our meetings, we kind of run out of gas. I think people are tired after a long meeting and we're ready to pack up and head on to the next challenge. And so I think we would accomplish that better if we put it right here with the announcements item at the end of it. So what I would suggest is that we put an item 4 under announcements. I guess it would be maybe D. And it would say something like comments, suggestions, and information items by board members. And I'm thinking about something that would be very brief, but we could just kind of get in touch with each other on that. So I would hope that we could try that for a couple of months. If it turns out it doesn't work, we could try something else. But I think that would add to it.
Anybody, Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with John. I think that'd be a good idea. What the way the agenda works right now is, we often ask, are there any petitions from board members? And at least my interpretation of that is that like this is some sort of higher level suggestion than what John is recommending, and I think what John is recommending could be helpful.
Any other comments?
I agree also.
Looks like there's consensus to try it for a couple months and see how it works. So you'll add that to the agenda. Each agenda. Right, John?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'll just give it a test run and see.
Well, wait a minute. I'm going to wait to decide until after the test.
So, Ruth Rouse is working with our management of lands near Cane Creek, and one thing that she's planning for later this spring is a prescribed burn, which would be setting the woods on fire on purpose with the purpose of getting rid of invasive species and helping the species of plants and trees that we want to have there be more productive. Of course, that has to be done under very controlled conditions. The Chapel Hill Public Library is going to have a prescribed burn on their land there in Chapel Hill. And I'm trying to keep in touch with them to find out when it's going to be. And so if I can find out in advance, I will let the board know so that we could observe that if we want to. I'll make just one other quick announcement. About a month ago, we had a session with the newly elected Chapel Hill council members, and quite a few of you were here, but not everybody. But one thing that really struck me at that meeting was that Mary Tiger made had made a report on the affordability initiative, and the new council members from Chapel Hill were we mentioned that as we were briefing them, and they were very interested in that, very interested. And they were particularly interested in the Care to Share program. So I just think we're on the right track with that affordability initiative, which has a lot of creative parts to it. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other, John?
I wanted to add on to your first item. I wonder if OWASA wants to be proactive in communicating about this. We may have a distribution list already for forest management, or it may be a little bit stale, but is that something that we want to communicate to outside of the board?
The Chapel Hill Library burn?
Yeah. As, something that we are observing as a practice and,
Oh,
you know.
I don't know.
I mean, I don't personally see the strong correlation there. I mean,
Especially if they
Yeah.
mess it up and the house burns down.
I don't know. I guess I'm still not sure why we would do that.
Why we would do dry burn or why we.
No, why would we communicate Chapel Hill Library's dry burn? No, I'm just curious why. I mean,
Well, I think it's a relevant practice to our forestry management, which we're getting into. So it's a demonstration in a way. So that would be one
Oh,
reason.
okay.
And
So it's a
also,
demonstration sort of thing.
it's a demonstration, yeah, for our own practices, for our own learning, for our own practices, for the community's understanding. And, honestly, the town tells others about what OWASA's doing, chlorine and this and that. So more of a
And
public
it's-
service message.
Ed?
It's not on your printed agenda, but under announcements by staff, Ruth was going to talk to you all about an upcoming community meeting we're having on a planned prescribed burn at our Cane Creek mitigation track. So we do expect to communicate with forestry management stakeholders and others about something specific we're doing on our lands. So like I said, Ruth here in a few minutes will tell you a little bit more. Or if you want, we can have her pop up now and provide that announcement.
Any other comments from board members? Okay, well, let's go to Todd Taylor, General Manager of Operations, to make an announcement.
Thank you. I just wanted to let you all know that over the next few weeks, I'll be making presentations to the local elected boards about our Agua Vista project. As y'all know, we're moving into the full deployment phase of that project, so we thought it'd be good to get out there publicly. And it'll be just a real brief presentation, but we are going to feature our informative video and show that at the meeting. So we think it'll be a good opportunity just to, again, kind of get the word out about this project. The Board of Aldermen meeting that I'll be at is on March the 20th. And on April 11th, I'll be at the town of Chapel Hills meeting. And we've also put out the invitation to Board of County Commissioners as well. Back from them yet as when they may want that. Also, just so you know, I sent out a email earlier this afternoon to you all for review. It's just the details about that, about the Agua Vista project and where we're at with the project. So we appreciate if you all have got any comments, if you could get those to me by Monday, because we need to get that out for the Board of Aldermen's agenda early next week.
All right, Ruth Rouse, Planning and Development Manager.
All right, so as John mentioned, we are having a prescribed burn on a portion of our mitigation tract, and that prescribed burn will take place sometime in April or early May. So to educate the public about why we're doing that burn and to answer any questions that they may have on the burn, we are planning to hold a public meeting, and that is on Wednesday, March 21st at 7 p.m., and that'll be at the Mapleview Agricultural Education Center out on Dairyland Road. So there are other questions that you all have, I know, given your prior conversation here? Yes, thank you. I meant to. So we are getting ready to send out a public notice as well as a list of frequently asked questions that we worked on with the North Carolina Forest Service. They're the ones that will be doing the burn for us, as well as the Wildlife Resources Commission. And I had Dave Holly, our forestry contractor expert, look at it as well. So we'll be sending that out to anyone who lives within a half mile of the prescribed burn space place. And that's based on what the Forest Service recommended as the area of notice. And then, as we've done prior for any activities on our mitigation tract, anyone who is within 1,000 feet of the boundary of our tract, we notify them as well. We'll also do a press release and put some information on our website on that as well. And that frequently, you will all get a copy of this. My goal is to have that out tomorrow. Actually, it was to have it out yesterday, but you will all see a copy of all of this. So.
This is not the first time we've done a burn, is it?
As far as I know, it is, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Fine. John?
And this was a sort of a controversial community topic. When was that? 7, 8 years ago?
2010, or
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the,
Right. Or I don't know if it was a community or maybe just our neighbor. Who knows? I don't know. I don't know how widespread it was, but there were people who were concerned about it, right?
yeah, about forestry management in general, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Do we have a distribution list or anything like that today? I'm just curious. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on with questions.
Yeah, I have a couple. The email addresses that I have are now pretty old. And so I think a lot of them will probably bounce back. But as part of the public notice, we are setting up a way that people can sign up for a constant contact list. Because I can't tell you, just like the library can't tell you when the day of the burn is, because they do it based on weather conditions. But once we know when it is, we can provide that information to anyone on that constant contact list.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ruth.
Sure.
I'm sorry, one quick thing about
Ruth,
that. Sorry.
Sure.
Actually, hearing all that, I do think that it would be a good idea to have in communications saying that, there is prescribed burn that's going to be happening in Chapel Hill, so they have an idea of a demonstration.
Well, okay, first off, the Forest Service doesn't necessarily like everybody coming and watching.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
They want to be able to concentrate on the burn and also leave access open in case there is an emergency. So, as one of our FAQs, it's, what can I do? It's, well, let's stay away from the burn on the day of it. I mean, if you live in that area, okay. But the other thing is that with the library burn, I did talk to the librarian that's coordinating. They're also using the Forest Service to do their burn as well as the Botanical Garden. And she indicated that the Forest Service, it's going to be, because it's right outside the library, they have to be really careful on those weather conditions. And it might be they think they're going to do it and get out there and they don't do it. And she said that they're kind of saying that people won't even realize they've done it until after they're done.
Okay.
Because it's going to be that quick a burn. It's going to be like 15 minutes for them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, we'll now go to the consent agenda. And are there any public comments on the consent agenda? Do any board members wish to pull an item on the consent agenda? If not, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
First by Yinka, second by Barbara. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Okay, the ayes have it. Okay, we'll now go to the regular agenda, and the first item under that agenda is review and approve energy management plan update. Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager, will make a presentation a little bit longer than 10 minutes.
I warned him. All right, good evening. It's really nice to be back here with you guys to talk energy. I know the draft energy management plan that was in your packet was slightly shorter than the plan last year. It's still pretty lengthy. So I'm going to spend some time this evening kind of hitting on some of the high points for it that I hope will inform your discussion and decisions on our energy management program, specifically around the 4 items listed in the cover memo. But very quickly, before we jump into that, I did want to provide some context on our energy management program. So this model may look kind of familiar to you. I've shared it with our staff, and I think it provides a nice method for approaching energy management. We're calling it the energy management pyramid. You may think, it may remind you of the very old food pyramid where the veggies and fruits are on the bottom. Those are what you want to get the most of. Grains and meats in the middle, and a few snacks and sweets at the top. So I'm going to make a kind of a different food analogy to this pyramid tonight, and that's the culinary pyramid of a college student. So that will make sense soon. But just to kind of talk about it from an energy perspective, so we have at the bottom the energy conservation, energy optimization. This is kind of the Jimmy Carter wear a sweater approach. It's making the most of the equipment and the infrastructure that we have and making sure that that's operating as energy efficient as possible. So this can range everything from shutting off equipment when it's not in use to modifying how we operate pump stations so that we're making sure to operate the most efficient pump when all other things are equal. So I wouldn't really call these strategies no-brainers because they do require a great deal of thought and understanding about our system, but they generally require no to little investment and can start making returns on our efforts pretty quickly. So that's what we want to do that all across the organization. It really gets to a lot of the kind of culture of energy management at OWASA. My college professor called energy conservation the lunch that you're paid to eat. So it's not just a free lunch, but it's the lunch that you're paid to eat. So it's especially good when it's med deli. But these are the really good stuff. So the college student really likes the lunch that they're paid to eat. The next is energy efficiency. That's where you're replacing older inefficient equipment with higher energy efficiency. They typically require an upfront investment, but that investment pays itself off over the life of the asset. At least that's how our energy management evaluations go. And so this is kind of the proverbial free lunch in the middle. And when we get as energy efficient and energy wise as we can be, that's when we can kind of turn towards renewable energy. So it's not where you want to start when meeting goals like you all have set for the organization, but it's really where you want, it's that kind of icing on the top. And so I was thinking about the food analogy as I was running this morning, and the best one I could come up with was a $20 fish sandwich that I had in Sausalito 9 years ago, and it was a $20 sandwich, and it was worth every single penny. I'm still thinking about it 9 years later. There's a picture of it. It was really good. So that's the $20 fish sandwich. We want to approach with strategy and thought. I got lots of referrals of where to go buy that $20 fish sandwich, but it really was worth it when I got it.
How were the French fries?
They were good, and I earned those because I rode a bicycle through San Francisco and across the Golden Gate Bridge. So my husband had a salad. He cheated.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. So I do want to highlight some programs and strategies that we have in the energy management plan update. But before I did that, I did want to highlight an opportunity that our team had this past year in May of 2017. Since we are a partner in the Better Buildings program, we were able to apply for and received a 4-day hands-on intensive training at both of our plants. So our maintenance staff, our operators, management, our engineering team participated, as well as some of our contractors. We had room, so we were able to invite some other utilities and folks from the state. And this training, really, we walked through, we spent a lot of time at the wastewater plant. And that's where a lot of the new strategies and opportunities came from, was from this training. So we're always looking, kind of again, getting at that, the lunch that you're paid to eat, those energy conservation optimization strategies, the extent that we can bring those trainings in-house and help inform that, culture change. We're looking for ways to do that. So as we, kind of get into the pyramid, I did want to highlight some energy conservation and optimization strategies that are either proposed in the plan or they're underway. Certainly when we think about energy at OWASA, our number one use of energy are pumps and motors. And so we have been working over the past year to think about a way to comprehensively address the efficiency of our pumps and motor systems. So we have installed a good deal of variable frequency drive on the pumps for which that makes sense. And so now we want to turn, we want to kind of dial that in even further and make sure we're using the pump stations in the most efficient way possible. So a couple of the strategies that we're looking at for the next year to do that, one is a dynamic pump optimization tool. And we're piloting it with our finished water pump station at the water treatment plant, which is the biggest energy user there. So this is a tool that's going to help measure and report current pump conditions versus their design, which will help inform the operations and maintenance and replacement to maximize energy savings on those assets. So, and if the pilot goes well, we hope to apply this to a number of other pumping stations, but we've just gotten that equipment installed and are looking at it.
Mary, this was on my list to ask you at the end, since
Yeah.
you're on the topic. So, and I think you partially answered the question. There's a lot of pump optimization called out in the report, and I was curious about the split between just optimizing current assets, like with the monitors and the VFDs, versus were we in a situation where we just had pumps that were either not amenable to that or too old and inefficient? I was just trying to understand the split between optimizing current assets or replacing old pumps with new ones. It sounds like we're primarily looking at upgrading what we currently have.
I would say that it's a mix. I think we have, even before the energy management program was official, we were installing a lot of variable frequency drives and looking at smart pump motor replacement. Now, with this optimization tool, one thing that's particularly exciting about using this on the finished water pump station is that we have a capital project on the horizon and to replace those pumps. And so it'll be really nice to have a good couple years of baseline data where we're monitoring that energy, and I think it'll help inform what that investment is.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers.
Oh, and it seems like along with the energy optimization, you might get to use one of your analogies, perhaps a free lunch along with this. If you're monitoring the motor power draws and those sorts of things in order to optimize electricity usage, you're probably taking less wear and tear on the pumps as well. I don't know if you're able to monitor that, but that might be kind of a little bit of icing on the cake.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of asset management and maintenance benefits to this as well, and using energy to provide indicators of other things that are going on. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And we did have a diverse asset management, maintenance, and operations kind of evaluating this tool that we're using, and we're all pretty excited about it. So kind of along with that, we are proposing to develop a comprehensive motor management program to really flesh out our database of our motor inventory and establish formal motor repair and replacement rules to guide the purchasing decisions and to train and work with our maintenance staff to kind of empower that on-the-ground decision-making for motor replacements. We're also proposing the implementation of a top-to-bottom pump station evaluations. So we've conducted similar evaluations before prior to repair and rehabilitation of some of our pump stations. That's been kind of the driver for those. So we're proposing to do some of those evaluations with the driver being energy management, energy savings. So really kind of targeting those evaluations to some of our largest using pump stations. Of course, there'll be lots of ancillary benefits as well, because they're going to be looking at safety, mechanical, electrical issues as well. Another thing that we're proposing is an online energy dashboard. So that would be pretty internal, but it's a software as service solution to warehouse, track, and analyze our energy use data, and really provide a dynamic platform for many folks across the organization to engage with the data, dig in, and make some informed decisions. This is particularly important because we have over 50 energy accounts between Duke Energy, Piedmont Electric, and PSNC. So this would help us compile that, enter in pumping metrics so that we could start to benchmark that, or I say start, we do, but this would be kind of the one place shop for it. And then it also can be a valuable resource as we start to deal with our own interval data. We're starting to give our customers some interval data about their water use, but we also are getting smart meters on our electrical meters, and so that's going to be a pretty powerful tool moving forward, and to be able to bring that in-house, warehouse that, and integrate that with some of our own metrics will be pretty powerful. So moving to the middle of the pyramid, I just want to give a nod to some recent and underway energy projects. Of course, most of the progress that you see towards our energy management goals are from investments in energy efficiency, particularly the more efficient aeration and blower system at the wastewater treatment plant. Two more recent projects is the obvious, well, it's pretty good in here, but the replacement of the HVAC system in this building, which is underway, and which we plan to, that it will reduce our use of energy for heating and cooling this building by about 35% and save us about $25,000 a year in energy costs. It's pretty innovative approach. We applied a custom incentive for Duke Energy and received a $14,000 custom incentive, but really excited about this project. It's going to be, I think, an interesting case study for the industry in the future, and just excited about the energy savings that it will bring. And then, of course, we recently finished our energy efficiency lighting upgrades to all of the lights on the 400 Jones Ferry campus. Based on the original quotes, we were just going to do the administration building and the water treatment plant campus first, but we got some pretty competitive quotes, in large part because of a new Duke Energy incentive program, which covered about half of the costs of the whole project. And so we were able to add the ops center as well. So most of the lighting across many of our facilities has been converted to LED. It takes a little bit of getting used to it first, but I think I have gotten reports that it's a much better light quality, brighter light in places that needed it. It's quicker to turn on in our warehouse and high bays where we had metal halides, and it's certainly safer for our maintenance staff to not have to climb up there. This is a picture I took yesterday in the warehouse of the new lights there. So I'd say that's a free lunch. Pretty good return on this investment. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about fish sandwiches. Between solar PV that OWASA could look to own, there's another objective in the energy management program where we're looking to have third-party development of solar PV, and then also the biogas to energy project. So starting with the project that you had in your packet of the ground mount solar photovoltaic or PV system at the Cane Creek Reservoir. So last year when we had this discussion, we had the benefit of a Department of Energy National Renewable Energy Laboratory feasibility study that they conducted for us free of charge, that looked at a number of our properties and analyzed the potential for solar generation there. And based on that analysis, we determined that solar PV did have the potential to be viable on a few of our sites. And we moved forward with further evaluation of two of them. One of them was a system here at 400 Jones Ferry, a combination of rooftop solar and a parking canopy that would cover the back lot where some of our very nice mobile assets park. That was one. And the other was a ground mount system at the Cane Creek Reservoir. So Johnny Riley and I rode the gator around that property and discussed different areas that we thought would be good for a solar system, and narrowed it down on the clear field that's right at the entrance, right there on 54 to the left as you drive right in. This would be a good place. There are nearby power lines, and it could be connected behind the Cane Creek Pump Station meter, which is one of our larger energy users. We sought over the last year, we've sought high-level scoping documents from reputable solar developers, only one of which fully responded. So based on their quotes, we looked at the economics. We determined that the rooftop combined with the parking canopy here was not an economically viable project, but that the ground mount system at Cane Creek holds some promise. As the property and the current demand conditions allow, it would be a 733 kW system that would generate about 1 million kilowatt hours a year. This represents about 4.5 percentage points of our baseline. So it's worth pointing out that as our plan stands right now for the projects for which we can, assign a number to and estimate their energy impact without a solar system, we will most likely fall short of the 35% goal at this point. So we looked at the finances, and you have a table in your packet. I hope you can see it. It's a little bit grayer than I thought, but a solar PV system has the potential to qualify for a 0% interest loan from the state revolving fund Green Project Reserve. So we ran the analysis with that 0% interest rate for a 20-year term, and incorporated a $50,000 rebate, which Duke Energy has been mandated by the legislature to award. With that, we have pretty good returns. So we're looking at about a 21-year payback without thinking about the social cost of carbon. So our economic threshold that we're looking at is that it would pay itself off within the life of the asset. And so without incorporating the social cost of carbon with a 0% interest rate, it would do that. If you do account for the social cost of carbon, which you all asked us to do, we're looking at about a 12-year payback. John, did you have a question? You look like. Now, if we take out a kind of classic revenue bond at 3.5% interest, we don't get a rebate. The economics change a little bit. And it probably explains why only one solar developer would give us a free estimate. And it creates a really interesting policy decision for you all. So without incorporating the social cost of carbon, the payback, the net present value of this asset is negative at the end of its useful life, which is 25 years. But when you incorporate the social cost of carbon, it falls just under that. Yeah.
Yeah. So quick question here, Mary. So one of the things that struck me in the report, and maybe I could have caught this at some point in the last 3 years, I was surprised how low our electricity cost at 5 or 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So my preliminary question is, do we get some kind of a deal as a volume customer or as a government entity? How is it that our price is so low? I see Mary nodding, the other Mary.
Yeah, we have the OPTV rate on many of our large accounts. Cane Creek Pump Station is one of them.
And then when we calculate the return on the solar power, I assume if you put it at Cane Creek, would we run our pumps with our own power, or will we send it all into the transmission line and sell to the utility?
It would be net metered.
Okay.
So it would, if it was generating more than what we were using, it would spin the meter backward in essence.
Right. And so when we're spinning the meter backwards, are we still earning the 6.5 cents, or will we be earning?
Under current law, yes.
Okay.
So under current operate net metering is
Your price in, your price out?
right.
Okay.
Right. If Duke Energy wins their long-term argument to pay avoided costs instead of net metered costs, it actually doesn't change the economics for us too much because we do have such a low rate. Okay. So if Heather was here, she would tell you the exact amount, but I want to say it's about 5.5 cents. So our blended rate is pretty darn close to the avoided cost rate. So it would change the economics, but not as significantly as it would for your house. If you could.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So based on this information, that we have. We're not projecting any immediate expenses over the year, but these types of projects do take time to develop. And so we're kind of proposing a more phased timeline. And so we're not asking for resources in this first year, but we would need to mobilize and start moving on this. So things that we would do in the next year, one would be to engage the community. So the energy management plan update mentioned our neighbors at Cane Creek, but I'd like to amend that to add our customers and ratepayers. You know, if we get to a project who's, you know, without, you know, social cost of carbon, as Pat Davis would say, like there's no money in your pocket from that. And so we had said when we passed the community engagement, or when you all passed the community engagement plan, is that, you know, projects that really kind of straddled this payback really warranted a great deal of community engagement to make sure it reflected the values of our customers. So we would propose doing that in the next year. Monitoring the regulatory environment. Things have changed a lot in the past year, and I'll get into that when talking about third-party development of solar on our land. But there's been a lot of changes, and so we're not 100% sure how all of that is going to play out. So keep our ear to the ground on that, and then develop an implementation plan that would lay out, you know, the timeline for working with Duke Energy to the extent that we could project that, for working with Orange County, State Water Infrastructure Authority, and others. Next year, we'll have the benefit of this information and be able to kind of reevaluate on moving forward. But as you look at the CIP, in some scenarios, you will see it penciled in this project, which is a $1.6 million, the one quote that we received, $1.6 million investment on construction. So moving to the solar PV third party. So in a discussion about land management on May 25th, 2017, the board asked staff to do 3 things as they relate to this objective, the 5th objective, to seek third party development of renewable energy on OWASA property. We only did 1, but we did it with good reason. So we did identify a potential OWASA site for large-scale solar PV, and it's about a 22-acre cleared field on the biosolids property, and we identified in the plan some of the criteria that we were using internally to identify that piece of property. But we did not seek qualifications from a third-party solar developer, nor did we engage the public on such a project. And the reason why is the House Bill 589 that was passed July 27th, 2017, the Competitive Energy Solutions for North Carolina bill, which overhauled solar development in our state pretty significantly. Many of the programs that were called for in that legislation are still being worked out by the Utilities Commission. We're starting to see, starting to get some glimpses of what it's going to look like. But what it did in essence for us is it really changed the business model for how we might have approached this type of project with third parties to develop solar PV on our land. One negative impact that we know is that it reduced the size of a system that could qualify for a 10-year power purchase agreement from 5 megawatts to 1 megawatt. And that's really beneficial when you have outside investors. You need more assurance on what the rate is going to be that you're offered and the duration of that rate. And there may be some solar developers that are interested in smaller projects or, you know, compiling smaller projects, but it's just not, it's not as easy as a sell. There are some positives though that are yet to be seen. Duke Energy is going to be required to approve a great deal of solar in the state, particularly in our region, in the Duke Energy Carolina side. There's going to be a competitive procurement process that's going to take place in stages, the first of which will be awarded in February 2019. That could be good in that it's you know, on our side of the state, and it will be interesting to see in that first phase what the supply and demand of solar is. So that could prove to be beneficial for us. The law also allows for solar leasing, where a private entity would own and finance the system. OWASA would lease that system back, but own the energy. That could also be an interesting thing to consider for this, as well as the Cane Creek property as well. They're in the process of approving the lessors right now. And it also, the law allows for a green source rider program, which would allow OWASA or other large industrial type customers, has a dog ear for UNC and the military, to purchase solar energy from an off-site system instead of Duke's typical energy sources. So it doesn't put our land to use, but again, it's kind of an interesting concept to see how that plays out. So given all of that, our recommendation to the board is to wait a year to move on this objective, monitor how things play out with the competitive procurement process and what programs develop, and come back in next year's energy management plan with a good summary of what's going on there and ways that we might be interested in participating. All right. And now everyone's favorite renewable energy project is our biogas to energy project. The NERTS committee has met twice over the past year. I apologize for the wordy bullets, but this is the kind of my takeaways of those meetings and bullet points. The September 2017 meeting was to discuss a partnership assessment, or the summer of matchmaking, that we did to find a good regional partner that was ready to move with us on developing a plan for how to utilize our biogas energy. We did not find a partner that was ready to invest in the design of a project, but we did find some partners that were quite interested. So the town of Carborough expressed interest in evaluating a biogas to vehicle option. Still very much at early stages of evaluating that, but their fleet has a very complementary use to our, diesel fleet as well. So that could be a partnership. Orange County Solid Waste and the Chapel Hill Carborough City School System are potentially interested in the exploration of co-digestion of food waste. Both of those options have the potential to be economically viable. At the December 2017 meeting, the NERTS committee did kind of a reassessment of all the options given the partnership potential and the economics, recognizing there were financial risks really associated with all the projects at this point. We kind of took a pretty large range based on our technical understanding at this point, and there's risks associated with them all. The only actionable option is a biogas to pipeline strategy. That's the only one that we could move forward with right now to meet the 2022 deadline, and to make full beneficial use of the biogas that we're generating. That doesn't require a great deal of partnerships. Does require a great deal of gas treatment and conditioning. Yeah.
So we did hear back from PNC or PSNC, whatever it is, about what parameters they would accept.
PSNC doesn't have those standards set yet. What we have heard from them is that they are interested in exploring it with us.
Okay.
And we know that the city of Raleigh is looking to inject their biogas into the pipeline when their new wastewater treatment plant fully comes online. So we can anticipate that discussion is taking place, and it is happening with Piedmont Gas right now with the Utilities Commission. But we got a thumbs up that they are interested in talking about it, which is as far as we got. Long-term economics of the other options are potentially more viable, but not ready yet. As I stated before, a biogas to vehicle option, more viable than a pipeline option, and supplementing our solids with high-strength organic waste is going to enhance the economics of any of these projects. So given all of that, the NERT's recommendation to the full board is that we work to get our biogas to boiler system as fully functional, so that we're making, the best use of that we can in our current boiler system to heat the digesters. That we engage and assist with complementary analysis of our community partners, and that we delay the 2022 deadline to have the biogas to energy project online. So not giving it up, but keep working at it from different angles. I'm way over 10 minutes. I'm confident. But this is my last official slide. So this is just a bullet point of what's on your cover memo of some direction to your discussion. Again, we know that it's a lot of material that we shared with you, but these are kind of the specific things that we're asking for feedback on, knowing that there's sub-bullets under those as well. So with that, happy to serve as a resource for your discussion.
Comments or questions from the board? Yep.
Yeah. So you hit all of my questions except for one, and this one's a little bit particular. I was just curious, amongst one of the energy savings projects was listed as real-time nitrification monitoring, which I assume is to slow down the blowers at the wastewater treatment plant when we don't need it. But if you have any other info on that, I was just curious about that project.
I guess I can tell you, I could probably speak intelligently about it to the extent that it is what is written in the energy management plan.
Okay.
But I know it involves, moving the ammonia monitors to a different place and allowing us to dial that system in even further. But I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, I was just curious. It was an interesting.
We did have in the energy management plan last year, if you may recall, we had much more detailed energy summary, strategy summaries, and that one fleshes out a lot more what that strategy is all about.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any feedback to the staff on the bullets that's on the screen? Is there general consensus that this is good? John?
Well, I like the plan. I like the progress. I like, the look forward and hope that we can continue to make progress. I mean, I like how distributed it is. It isn't just like you say, the fish sandwich. And I've had one of those, by the way. They're really good.
They're really good.
Mine was in Taos, New Mexico, but it doesn't matter, does it really? But anyway, I do have some questions about PV. I think you mentioned, did you say there was a 25-acre site that you were looking at with a third party?
The 22-acre site
22.
on the biosolids land that's kind of tucked back,
Okay.
and in consultation with our wastewater and biosolids manager and our new solids handling supervisor, felt like the program could probably spare that 22 acres
Right.
for the next 25 years.
Right. Well, I'll tell you why I asked, because I guess I think that scale is important in these PV projects, and 733 kilowatts is, not quite there. I mean, it's like a medium-sized project, maybe, I don't know. But if we could make it a bigger project, I bet the economics start to look better. And so I hadn't seen the 22 acres in the report, so that seemed like new information to me, and I wondered why we hadn't evaluated that for our own investment. Of course, it would cost more money. And let's see, I guess that was the main thing. Also in the report, it talked about how we restricted land that was in the watershed, and I wondered if that was important or not. I don't think of these as being abusive or causing a lot of pollution or anything like that. So I'm curious about that too. Thank you.
Welcome. And good point about why we didn't look at it. I think we weren't thinking that large of scale for an OWASA investment. The kind of rule of thumb is it's 8 acres per megawatt. But we could certainly look into that as well. if that was something that you all were interested in. For why we stayed out of the watershed, primarily it's because the lands that we own, right, and looking back at Ruth if I say something completely wrong, but lands that we own right around Cane Creek are in the critical watershed, for which there are some requirements around that. But no, and you can, there's, you can design them so the, water runoff is quite clean. That helps.
Essentially, there are, within our watershed, there just aren't, except for this highly sensitive areas, there just isn't that size of land available. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Oh, and last time, this is down the road, but I think it would be a pretty important decision to say OWASA, I could understand where OWASA, a scenario where OWASA might want to own the property or own the land or lease, but I'm not sure we'd want to operate it. That we would, I wondered if we'd want to explore contracting operations, even if we were the owner of it. Yeah, but that's down the road.
Yeah. The quote that we did receive on the system that we would own, we had a maintenance contract. Beyond that, the operations are, kind of mowing in between and making sure that, just kind of monitoring the output of the system. But those costs did entail, I think, an annual cost. I don't want to say right now what it is, but a couple $1,000s to maintain that system.
John?
Up at the very top of the pyramid, we've got a few things that are not quite there yet, in terms of using 100% of our biogas. You've got a lot of good options laid out there, but it doesn't seem that there's an obvious viable one yet. And with the solar energy, the feds and the state have been changing the rules. And so, it's very hard to know how that's going to come out. But I'm really not bothered by that. I'm really happy with the bottom part of the pyramid, with this really systematic effort to do all the day-to-day less glamorous work, to make sure that we're using pumps efficiently and blowers efficiently and all that. And so I'm just very impressed with how you described this training session, I guess a training and implementation session at the wastewater plant, with many of the staff people involved, some consultants, some people from other utilities. I just think that's terrific to be doing the basics like that. So, and maybe in a couple of years, these more exotic alternatives will become clarified and we can do something on them. But better not to make a big move until we know where we're going.
You don't want to buy a bad $20 fish sandwich.
That's pushing it a little bit too far. Rashir.
I echo these statements, but I really also really like the pump optimization thing. But along those lines, along with the smart meters we have on electricity, is there any tools, optimization tools for operations of the plant that you'd be considering, like when to, the decision making that the operations staff has to do of when to do, certain things on, certain things off. Is that part of the pump optimization, or is that a separate thing that you would have to have another tool for if you so wanted to?
The pump optimization tool is going to be the most, again, that's where the bulk of our energy use are. So we're mindful of on-demand use and off-demand use, and to the extent that we can shift energy to off-peak, is, we're making those efforts and making those strides. The pump optimization tool will provide, so we have our finished water pump station. There's 4 pumps. 3 of them have VFDs on them. So we have ranges that overlap. If we want a certain amount of water out of the water treatment plant, we can choose, a couple different pump options. This will tell us you want this amount of flow, here's the most efficient way that you can get that flow out of the water treatment plant. You can run the optimization tool to just make those decisions for you. We're not running it in that mode indefinitely. Yeah, we're looking to it to inform decisions, and everything else equal, letting the energy efficiency guide that decision making. Again, there are other reasons why we might choose a certain pump over another, a certain operational strategy, but if everything else is equal, then we'll have information to make that as energy efficient. So it's going to be in the pumps and motors, and where we would really like to focus this optimization is on our larger pump stations, where we do have some choices there. Does that help answer your
Yeah,
question?
I think so. It sounds like it's probably a very, not a good, apple on a tree, but there might be some other optimization you could do, but it may not provide that much.
So getting down to the bottom part of the pyramid, and I made mention of like the culture change, and that's really as important, because it's to come through and to audit everything and say this is how we're sure we can dial it in the closest we can get. That's pretty difficult task with as complicated as our operations are. But if we have, let's see, I have a lot of extra slides, but I wanted to get to oh, there they are. So this is our energy team that meet quarterly to discuss energy management strategies. They're from across the organization: wastewater, water. We have field crew in there, engineering, operations, maintenance, and so we're having those discussions, and the conversation is, if you see something that we can make more efficient, bring it up. If it's something that you can do right now, do it. If it's something that requires an investment, let's evaluate it and kind of run it through our program and our process. And so, embedding energy into our decision making, and that's what we're doing with the capital projects that are listed in the plan. They're being driven by needs greater than energy, but we kind of recognize them, flag them as opportunities to improve the way that we're using our energy, and kind of tag that on as a secondary objective.
Okay, since there's some agreement on the board, so the staff has suggested a motion. Let me read that and see if there's board can support it. That the board of directors approves the energy management plan and authorizes the executive director to proceed with the project studies and strategy described in the plan, including incorporation of the proposed projects and studies in the FY 2019 operating budget and capital improvements budget. The executive director will provide for an annual update of the plan and inform the board if and when significant changes occur in underlying assumptions, funding, and partnerships and opportunities. Board can live with that. Motions would be appreciated. The motion was made by John Young.
I won't repeat it, but
Yeah, it was a mouthful. John Young made the motion.
Second.
Second by Jeff. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. No nays. Motion passes.
Can I ask one more question without
It's already
it? It doesn't
passed.
affect the motion though, but this whole I'm back at the top, but again, I like these other guys, my neighbors here, I really appreciate the LED lighting. I mean, anyway, so I'm back at the top, biogas. Can you give a little history on how that got disconnected, the maintenance project that got disconnected, and the forward looking, how soon that'll get back online?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
I'm sorry, board members, for taking this diversion.
So the reason why it came offline to begin with was that we were doing a pretty significant repair, rehabilitation of two of our digesters down at the wastewater treatment plant, so number 1 and 2. So during that time, we weren't able to operate the biogas to boiler system. And primarily because the digester that has the gas storage bubble, that was one of the digesters that was down. So the system was brought fully online in 2017, and we found that biogas to boiler system was not functioning properly, and we had some safety concerns about how it was functioning. So we've been refining our operational strategies with the new bubble, and making some changes there, and troubleshooting various components of that system to kind of rule out the inexpensive options. As of yesterday, it seems as though the strategies improvements have worked, and so it's been running. Our boilers have been running on biogas since yesterday at 9 a.m. So we're going to monitor the performance very closely, and in 6 weeks decide, if we want to move forward with the pipe replacement, which was discussed in the energy management plan, or if we think that this is going to hold steady for a while. So right now we're on biogas, and we're going to work really hard to keep it that way.
Pat would be proud.
Because I went, 30 minutes? Thank you all.
That's his definition of a few minutes. Thank you, Mary. All right, the next item is continued discussion on unregulated compounds and water resources, including recent regional analysis of perfluorinated substances. We have Katie Harold, the laboratory supervisor, and Ken Laughlin, the water supply and treatment manager, here to answer any questions. Are there any comments from the public on this report? Are there any comments or questions from the board on this? Jeff?
Yeah, so this item stayed on the agenda based on some comments I made at the last board meeting, and one of the commitments I made was to put out a written document to the rest of the board members. I did draft that up. I asked for a legal review beforehand, which wasn't completed by tonight's meeting. That's why I don't have the written. I just wanted to make sure that what I'd said was accurate, and also that I didn't suggest that we could do things that we couldn't do. I had a quick chat with Bob, so if you bear with me just for a minute, I'll kind of summarize what those thoughts were, and I do maybe have a question for Katie at the end. So what I was trying to articulate at the end of the last board meeting was my concern just about our monitoring of the Cane Creek watershed and how we might communicate with the people that live there. And what struck me and what I was trying to articulate last time is if you look at water systems around the country, what really gets people in trouble is when there's an unknown contaminant in the reservoir that's soluble, that isn't particularly efficiently removed by granular carbon. That's the stuff that slips out the back end. And that can be, some towns get in trouble when that's a metabolite from algae. And it struck me in our discussion with Katie a couple weeks ago. Here we have these PFASs and PFOSs, again, that were in there. We don't monitor for them. And they're partly about 50, 70% removed by the carbon, if I recall. Yeah, from your chart. Yeah.
It depends. Some
Right.
of them are really efficiently removed up to, 90%, and some of them are basically go straight through. It depends
So-
on their chemistry.
With that preamble, what I wanted to have the board think about, and what was in my note I had sent to Bob for review, is the two things that strike me and that we might want to consider are whether it's time to renew, just looking at what's happening in the watershed, perhaps on a parcel by parcel basis. One of the things Bob and I chatted about is maybe some of Mary's old friends at the Institute for Environment might have a student that would like a project like that. But just to see what's happening in those, just what's happening out there, if there's been any changes. And then also with our decision to bring in a new communications manager, maybe there's a time just to engage with that community and just to see what's happening out there. I know we're not 100% sure what's bringing these in, the PFOSs and PFASs. We have some thoughts. It could be around some agricultural land use. So that was sort of the proactive community side. And then also just wondering, here we found these unknown materials in Cane Creek just as a result of what's happening down near Fayetteville and the other studies. Whether there was any sort of a monitoring program we should consider. And I don't know how one might do this. An occasional water sample run through a fancy mass spectrometer, looking for changes in fingerprint that just would say something's different than it used to be. So this somewhat, I'm about to smile at Mary because my comments are too long too. But that's what I was trying to articulate at the last board meeting. So to summarize, is there any communication or monitoring we should do more proactively in the watershed? And/or is there some more monitoring that we should do on an occasional basis of the reservoirs?
Did I understand you correctly that some action by a third party could stimulate the algae?
We're not really sure. I mean, there's a lot of things that monitor, or a lot of items that impact algae growth. And our algae growth last year was early, and one of the reasons, and more vigorous. And one of those reasons could be we're getting more nutrients into the watershed, into the reservoir. That tends to be from people utilizing fertilizer.
Mhm.
So actually, really fascinating article the other day on much of the Chesapeake Bay. Many places that haven't grown underground grasses in decades have been starting to grow grass this spring, and it's all, at least the author of this article was about, nutrient reduction has been a significant effort in that area for a while. And I think, it's when we have something like an unusual algae event in our reservoir, it's possible something's happening upstream where we're getting more nutrients in. And so that's just and again, I talked to Bob a little bit about that. We can't tell people what to do, but we can engage with them and provide information if that might be helpful.
Thank you, Jeff. Sure.
I wholeheartedly support what Jeff just suggested, and curious to see if we could follow along those endeavors. I like the whole idea of what's going on parcel to parcel. I think we talked about this in the NERS committee meeting a long time ago, and I think I think we should have a better idea of what's going on.
Okay. Do we want to continue this to the next meeting until we get the email out, or
I
how do you
think,
wish to?
I think really what the question is, what's the appropriate follow-up action? And so who's the leader of the NERTS committee? Is that you, John?
Yes.
Well, as the facilitator of the NERTS committee, I just wonder, I think there's at least some general board interest around this. We're sure speaking, I see some head nods and some agreement. Whether what I try to articulate in terms of monitoring what's going on, if we have a recommendation where there might be some action we do want to go forward with that we might then, we can't make a decision that we might bring to the board and say, hey, here's some things that we think that might be worth our time and effort. And that seems like it's sort of a NERTS arena. So
your suggestion is to refer to the.
I am.
Okay. Consensus on doing that? Back to the NERTS committee. John Morris.
I appreciate Jeff's suggestion, and I like his two-part recommendation that we should do some investigation to find out what kinds of activities there might be in the watershed. That would include, people who are disposing of sludge and so forth in the watershed. And I think the other utilities would be willing to share information with us. And then the other thing is an occasional spectrometer scan that might just hunt around and see if there's anything there that needs to be more fully sampled on, including not just the unregulated pollutants, but the regulated pollutants.
Okay, so we refer that to the NERTS committee for further discussion to bring back to the board. Ed?
And we'll be happy to support that. And what I'd like to suggest is allow us some time to work with others to inform that discussion. So, I know there's a sense of urgency on that, and we'll act accordingly. Just a couple of weeks ago, we met with a number of professors from the UNC School of Public Health. We have an annual meeting, and we did talk about this topic a good little bit, and I think they might really be helpful in informing the discussion around these. So what I'd like to do is have some time with our team to figure out how we can best support and inform that discussion. So I'm not sure if it will be ready in 3 weeks or 2 months, but what I'd like to do is again, provide a good basis for that discussion, and then we'll get with John and the committee and get that meeting scheduled, if that's okay.
Sounds good. Bashir?
I think another point that would naturally go into this meeting would be the study that you had shared with us about, the risk in our watershed and, certain systems or permits that are in our watershed. And I'd like to learn a lot more about that and have some actual discussion about that, or description is what I'm trying to say about, it was a lot of data, but not very much description of that. And some of it looked very interesting to me. That could be delved into as part of this.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to item number 5 then. Review preliminary fiscal year 2019 budget information. Stephen Winters, Director of Finance and Customer Service, will make the presentation. It's looking dark right now, Steve.
Sorry, I messed up now. Thanks. Unfortunately, the first thing I wanted to show was what I'm messing up here. Yeah, can you come up with a quick analogy for me? It's just the one, But this is a really, really good slide. It's worth the wait. So what we're going to cover tonight is only one part of the fiscal 19 budget, and because of that, I wanted to show you where we are in the process. Far left, that's tonight. We're going to review the operating budget. That's the $22.8 million for wages, salaries, maintenance, all that kind of stuff. Kind of as an aside, I sent you today the report on the system development fees that we have been working on, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we're shooting for next Thursday to publish that on our website. The next board meeting we have on March 22nd, that's when we'll show you for the first time the capital equipment budget. That's the budget for trucks, the lab equipment that we're going to use, that we talked about a little bit earlier, and also the CIP, the 5-year CIP budget. We'll also by that time have had a chance to put all this together and come back to you with a rate recommendation, whether we suggest a rate increase or not. And we'll also set the dates for the public hearing. Following meeting on April 12th, we'll make any updates or revisions to the budgets that have happened in the meantime, and we'll ask you for authorization to publish information about the budget and the rate adjustment, if there is one, in advance of the public hearings. At the board meeting on May 10th, we'll discuss the merit and cost of labor adjustments. There is a provision, and I'll talk about that in just a second, in the budget, but it's just temporary. May 24th is when we'll hold the public hearings on budgets and rates, and you may recall that we also have to have a public hearing on the system development fees, and so we'll incorporate that. The plan is to incorporate that all on that one day. And then finally, on June 14th is when you'll have an opportunity to have taken in any information we got during the public hearing, and then officially approve the fiscal 19 budget. So just a couple of comments on what's in your packet. We the initial budget, the cut at the budget is $22.8 million. Last year, when we projected what we thought the budget for this year would be, in our 15-year financial planning model, it was about $100,000 less than that. So we're pretty close to what we had projected it would be. This budget includes what we typically call a placeholder for merit and COLA of 4% increase, a 10% increase in our health insurance premiums. We've gotten some initial indication that it might not be that much, and we'll adjust it as we find out. There are two, not new positions, well, I guess they are new, but they replace other positions. They're upgrades. The public affairs administrator is now the communications and community relations officer. That's been reflected in the budget. And then we had an accounting technician that we've reclassified as a safety and risk manager in the HR department. There is accommodations for the recommendations that we have on the taste and odor stuff. On the capital equipment budget that you'll see next week, there'll be about a $250,000 piece of equipment that will help. Todd sent you an email about a month ago on this, outlining it, but it's a piece of equipment that will allow us to do some monitoring in-house as opposed to sending it out to labs, so there's a big delay in time, and it will allow us to understand, like if we make an adjustment in our processing, it'll allow us to understand what the effects of that is. I don't know about immediately, but certainly sooner than a few weeks without sending it off to the lab. It'll allow us to make adjustments to that. So that will be in the capital equipment budget that you'll see next week. But in this operating budget is an additional lab analyst position that would be required if we get that piece of equipment. We would need the additional labor, person to operate it. So if we end up, if you end up deciding we don't want to buy the equipment, then we wouldn't need a staff position. But to summarize or to reiterate, that position is in this $22.8 million operating budget that's before you. And I think that's the only things that I wanted to highlight. Obviously, happy to answer questions.
Steve, since you're standing up, why don't you go ahead and talk about the revised report on the development fees?
Okay, sure. So I think on the consent agenda at your January 25th meeting, you approved the new buy-in method for calculating system development fee. And we had put some numbers in front of you on the effects of that, of switching to that new method. And, there were reductions across the board in water and sewer availability fees. In the intervening time, we and the consultants have had a chance to, comb through those numbers once again. And we discovered that there was, we were treating donated assets a little bit differently than what the law requires. And so after making that adjustment, the fees were changed and they went up slightly. I'll say slightly, a little bit, or however you want to characterize it. The example that I put in the email today was for a 1,300 to 1,700 square foot house. The old fee was about $1,200. The fee that you saw a month ago was just a hair under $500. I remember this right? I should have that in front of me instead of just quoting off. And the new fee is less than $100 more than that. So it's still a significant reduction, but it's just a few percentage points less than what you had seen before. I think one of the questions was, did you guys need to reapprove that? That's up to you. We can or we can't. I think what you did before was approve the method that we're using, and so to making a small adjustment isn't something that would require your approval, but obviously be happy to.
Can you provide more detail on what the change was?
I mean, why there was a change?
Yeah.
I can try. It's a little complicated, but
Yes, it is.
otherwise it doesn't work. So the new law requires you to go through these calculations, one of three, and once you go through those calculations, you have to reduce the asset value by outstanding debt and donated assets that we didn't actually pay for. Developers paid and then donated them to the organization. If those two numbers didn't add up to at least 25% reduction in the fees, then you had to increase it to 25%. Okay? The first time the consultants ran through it, they didn't include all of the donated assets that they should have. We came up a little bit shy of that 25%, so they increased it to 25%. But after we went through it, we actually, the reduction that was the part of the calculation was in excess of the 25%. So it ended up meaning that once you baked all that in, the rates for the fees went up just a little bit. I'd be surprised if that made much sense. But
I'm surprised that if you got donated assets, that the fees would go up.
it has to do with
me
that.
the asset, if you got free assets, then the fees would go down.
I mean, I'd be happy to follow up with a better explanation via email or whatever.
I mean, does,
It has to do with that 25% and how it associated with the donated assets and the outstanding liabilities, outstanding bonds.
yeah, maybe that's just a discussion you and I have unless the rest of the board is interested in it. John?
I was just going to say that ultimately we will approve the rates and fees in June or May or whenever that is. Yeah.
Or 14.
So at this point, it's more about are we okaying the publication of this?
Well, the reason I brought it up is that they need to publish them
Right.
next week, and I wanted to make sure the board was aware that there had been revisions and.
Yeah, I personally, that is just one of those emails that come out the day of the board meeting, and I don't have time to digest those, so.
I understand that.
So
Again, that's why.
it'll be looked at tomorrow, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up tonight.
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty much the same way.
And if I could add, we had originally targeted April 1st for publishing the report, so this is a little bit earlier than what we intended. If you needed more or wanted more time, we could take it.
Well, I think John's point is we're going to have to go through this process. We're going to take public comment on them, so there's no real harm in going ahead and publishing them.
I don't see that there is.
But is the rest of the board interested? Or I can just get with Steve and.
I might be, but I have to read the email first.
Okay. Yinka?
Okay, so my question is, the fees that we're looking at now, they're still less than what we're charging now?
Yes.
By minimum of 25%?
Yep.
Greater?
Not
or-
across the board, but yeah, I think for all the,
So maximum 25%, or is just 25%?
Some will be
It's-
more now.
some are more and some of the ones on the non-residential side or the large square footage are a little bit less than 25%. I think the range was 14 to 47.
The example that you gave for the 13 to 1,700 square feet, you originally told us it was going to be $798. The revised rate's going to be $864, and currently we charge $1,207.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea.
$60 or so more than, but still several hundred less than what we're currently charging.
Okay. Yinka, and then Jeff.
Okay. So my question would be on the assumptions and highlights about the equipment. So if we do get equipment, the lab analyst will be full-time for that or part-time for that?
Full-time.
And it requires a full-time because?
The lab is currently really understaffed anyway. We really need another full-time position no matter what. And if we're adding a whole nother instrument with all of the associated sample prep and sample collection and analyses and QA/QC and everything, then we absolutely need another person. But we're short right now.
So I understand the shortage, so that's that first. For my secondary question would be, how often are lab samples sent out?
So currently we're sending samples out once a week. We collect them on Mondays and we get the results on about Thursday. And at that point, that water's long gone and out in the system. And so if we had an instrument in-house, we'd be running samples every day and we'd have the results that same day. And we can also run some experiments in-house where we can play with treatment options and optimize our treatment so that we don't have another taste and odor event where it gets out in the system.
And so this person, they would be doing multiple duties, not just the samples, but then relieving some of the.
Yeah, so everybody in the lab does everything. So, I mean, my vision for the lab analyst is that they would ideally have a background on GCMS, but that they would also be able to cover other duties. We all cover all of the different analyses, and especially if someone's on vacation or out sick or on parental leave, we all do everything.
Jeff and Barbara?
So, Stephen, thank you, Katie. I would be remiss if I didn't say how much I like the graphs at the end.
Makes me so happy.
Thank you for those. I do find them very informative and useful. I hope others other than me feel that way. I just wanted to make one comment. If we, and particularly I like graph 4 on page 510, because this is a phenomenon we talk a lot about here. This is drinking water pumped and then personnel cost per million gallons. Right. Now this data is interactive, which is why you showed both lines. We've been cutting down on water use, even though we've been holding our budget tight. Our personnel cost per million gallons is going up. But if you look around Chapel Hill and you look at the and Carborough and Orange County nearby with all of the construction, eventually that million gallons pumped is likely to go up. That's my assumption. And so I think it's a really becomes a really interesting tool to project what we're doing going forward for fiscal management. So thank you for doing them, including them.
Barb?
So I see for the line item for consultants. So am I
Yes.
correct that there is like a pretty significant increase potentially coming under professional services consultant?
Yeah, so if you'll, on page 5.8, I guess maybe one or two more pages in.
Yep.
Because the board has asked for this before, in the past, we just automatically included it. That's a list of the proposed fiscal 19 professional services. And then it's got the current year's budget in there. So you can see the differences between what we budgeted this year and what is being asked for, for fiscal 19.
I'm asking, is all this necessary? That's what I'm asking. So number one is legal. Okay, who is legal? I see legal. Is that our man over here, Mr.
Yeah.
Epting? Okay, so we know that's fine. So that's always good. So yeah, I'm just looking because I know we as a board have had this conversation before about consulting fees and
Sure.
trying to streamline a little bit, where we can. So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, so if you look at the larger dollar amounts, we should go through them first. Legal, you mentioned, insurance, we feel like we're getting a pretty good deal on that. The biggest ticket there is liability, and that's getting from the League of Municipalities. Long-range water supply plan, $133,000. I'd call on my colleague Ruth to answer questions about that one if you have any. And there's another one, big one, number 20, down on line 27, but that's a bunch of stuff. Trustees for the bonds, credit card processing fees, there's really nothing in there that we can cut out. But like I said, it's a half a dozen things. Those are the big ones that jump out. But I mean, we could either try to respond right now or come back if you have any specific questions about anything that you think looks.
Yinka, then John.
My question with the insurance. And I know the reason I'm bringing that up is because it doesn't seem to cover a lot of stuff that occurs unless there's negligent liability. So if it were to cover non-negligent liability, is there rates for those? Or it's a pretty high amount I'm looking at. So
Yeah, about 25 to 30,000 in there is directors and officers liability, and then the rest, whatever that 80,000 is the property and casualty. And Bob, you want to talk about the negligence issue?
I don't know what issue that is. What percentage premium? Can't say what percentage of the premium is attributable to coverage of claims that would fall into the category of negligence. I know that there's insurance on our assets. There's insurance in the event there is damage caused by negligence on OWASA's part. But I don't know how to divide, I don't know how that premium is divided, Stephen.
If I understand the question correctly, I think what your implication is if we wanted to get a coverage that paid for damages where we were not proven negligent, what would that cost? Is
That insurance is not available.
Right.
If you're not liable, you may not pay. That's the dilemma that we look at when we have, for instance, damages that arise out of a line break where there's no provable negligence.
Is that right about that was more or less your question?
Both of them.
Yeah.
John?
I also appreciate the graphs. Jeff, thank you, and Stephen, thank you. I guess I'm gaining some concern, and the graphs kind of point that out, and maybe I'm echoing Barbara, except more in a generalized way. I'd say, we're talking about operating expenses increasing 5.5% over our forecast for this year. That's the last number on 5.7. And I feel like that's a pretty big number. It's going to be hard to, it means that ultimately we're going to be passing on some rate increases to customers if we maintain that habit. It's a pretty big habit. It's an increase that's bigger than we've had, I think, in quite a few years, I'm guessing.
I have to go back.
Yeah.
It's in the ballpark.
So it's not only increasing on a per million gallon basis, it's just increasing by over $1 million. So overall, I had, and I'll come back around to how we as a board, I might recommend we approach that. But before that, just a few line items. One, I would like to hear from Ruth about that long-range water supply consulting, what work those consultants will be doing. Question for you, Stephen, while she's wandering her way. That trustee line 27, how much of that is part of this banking procurement process that we talked about will be in the scope of that?
The
Like
refunding?
Yeah, like the credit card processing and are we still with Wells Fargo or are we somewhere else?
The trustee is with Bank of New York Mellon.
Right.
In our office, people we deal with are out of Florida.
Yeah. But there's, as you said, this is a bundle of a whole bunch of things, including credit card processing. Is that Wells Fargo or who? No, that's probably someone else.
That's a different group, Invoice Cloud. It's
Yeah.
the people that also we had our bill payment,
Yeah.
presentment and payment program that's paid through there. If you're asking, are these things part of the RFP that we're going to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, except,
Maybe
it would
not
be
the-
hard to unbundle the credit card processing from our current arrangement just because we
Yeah.
have to change.
Right. Well, yeah, so we don't have to address that tonight, but
But
it'll
yeah,
be interesting when we get to that conversation. What's the scope
Sure.
of, maybe it's more than one vendor that we're bidding, that we're
Yeah,
submitting an
maybe.
RFP for. I don't know. And then the other two line items, while Ruth comes up, is overtime and the group life and accidental death and dismemberment.
All right. Ruth, you got it?
John, which line item were you talking?
I'm sorry, I'm looking, I'm talking about on the consultant page right now with Ruth here, page 5.8. This is, if you look on line 12 of that, there's 133,000. This is the one that items that Stephen mentioned earlier in response to Barbara. 133,000 for consulting on long-range water supply plan.
Right, so last year we put out an RFQ and awarded that to Hazen and Sawyer, so it was qualifications based. Worked out with them on a scope of work, and that $133,000, what that came out to. So they will be doing the alternatives analysis, so looking at the engineering of how to lay out different alternatives and then looking at the costs of those alternatives. That's a big chunk of what they'll be doing. We knew that the board was very interested in like reclaimed water and potentially indirect potable reuse and that kind of thing. So they did build in a workshop with staff to kind of talk through kind of the state of the science and talk through potential alternatives for them to look at in detail, which we would work with them to kind of choose 2 reclaimed water alternatives out of that. It also includes looking at some modeling through our existing model structure to look at what's the risk so we can kind of compare risks under different alternatives as well. So those are kind of the big thoughts that goes in. And
Yeah, thank you, Ruth.
Rashir?
Going back to that.
Oh, hold on.
I've
Oh,
got
I'm
two
sorry.
more line items he's going to address.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
Your question
Sorry.
was what,
Uh,
group life?
Group life, not for, no. Group life and overtime, group life AD&D.
What was your question about the group life?
Well, the group life is more than doubling, is that right? Yeah, more than doubling. So I was
Yeah.
curious what's sort of the narrative with that, and same with overtime.
All right,
Not-
so group
yeah.
life, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have, that one doesn't ring, off the top of my head, I can't explain that. And I told Stephanie she didn't need to be here tonight. She would have that answer, so I'm sorry about that. Can circle back with you on that.
No, overtime is not doubling. I should
Right.
completely
Um,
spoke on that.
Todd, you have any comments on that? I mean, that's something that we, monitor regularly, but,
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's, we are anticipating some different dynamic that would drive up that particular number in terms of budgeting.
Yeah, I think we need to look into it, but we are actively managing, working to manage that because we have noticed that, issues going on and it has different factors at play there, but we are working on that. And like we said, we can get back with you on the budget number of what people are
Great, thank you.
planning to spend.
yeah,
So-
just for your information, each of the departments goes through their overtime and they factor in holidays and, vacations and all that stuff. So it's not just, a guess, that there's a calculation by it, so we'll get back.
I
to you.
understand, yeah. Thank you.
Rashir?
Circling back to that mass spectrometer, which is funny because I feel like that's exactly what the state had an argument about or discussion about with the Gen X issues. But anyways, am I understanding that the main purpose of that is for just the taste and odor issues in algae? Or is it, I mean, I know it can be used for a lot of things. So I'm just curious what you plan on using it for.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I was
What are
looking
your
at
plans?
spreadsheets.
Oh, it's fine. What are your plans on using for the mass spectrometer for?
I mean, primarily for the taste and odor, basically, if we calculate out the option of running the tests in-house every day so that we can keep track of what's actually going on and handle the situation versus sending them out to a contract lab, and the cost of doing that every single day, it's equal. And right now, we're only sending them out once a week, but we have a 4-day delay on those results. So it's really hard to stay on top of the situation. And it can also do a lot of other things. And we are looking into those options. There's a list of priority compounds put together by Homeland Security that there's a method for this instrument. There's other options. On my list of things to look into are things we could do for wastewater, but I have not done that yet. But we can get back to you. But it can do a lot of things.
Yeah.
Baths.
No, that's very, very specialized instrumentation that is incredibly expensive. And also, I don't know that we want to do that in-house versus sending it to a contract lab where it's independent.
Did I understand you to say that the savings on sending it to lab would cover the cost of the?
So if we calculate out the cost of running samples every single day, which is not what we're doing currently, but what we would like to do if we had it in-house, it's covered within 1 year. Does that make sense? If we sent samples to a contract lab every single day, 5 days a week, which is how we would like to run samples if we had the instrumentation in-house, it's basically the same cost. Plus, we would be able to do some of those experiments in-house where we can optimize our treatment, which may help with chemical costs and also, improve our treatment process.
So that part for me makes sense, but I mean, the whole taste and odor thing, it seems like it was a certain time of the year issue, and I mean, I don't see spending that much money for that, but if you have other, I'd like to see like what you can use this thing for, what you plan on using it for, because it seems to me like if it's just for taste and odor, I mean, I don't see the point of doing this daily and, I don't
Well,
know.
we see it completely different. We think with last year's episode, where how many phone calls did we have?
We
Over
received
200?
over 200 phone calls,
had
which
over-
for comparison is the number of and that was just in May and early June. For comparison, that's the number of phone calls that the lab received in all of fiscal 2016.
And this is our most important and reliable tool to make sure there's not a repeat events. We could continue in the future as we have in the past, and I think odds would be in our favor. We wouldn't have an episode that bad, but that's something
Yeah, I
we
mean,
don't think we should risk another episode where the quality of our water is questioned and whether they can count on us. And then I think it triggers more people to invest in wasting money in home treatment systems and things. So I think this is a really smart investment, and it's a bit, risk mitigation. And there's a lot of other things we can and are doing, so it's not just that one piece of equipment. Taste panels, training the taste and odor panels, employees, and other, optimizing the plants and treatment at the lakes. And so it's not just that, but based on our homework, and
Right.
for instance, we know the town of Cary Apex system, with Jordan Lake, that they've had periodic outbreaks, and, they have used this instrument and staff extremely effectively, and they've had very few problems because they've been able to stay on top of it. So, again, we think it's one of the most important investments we can make to ensure the trust and confidence that we'll not have another episode like we did last spring, which was just, and once it happened, I know I was surprised at how long it took to turn all that water over in our system. So it's not like just a day or two, it lasted over a month.
And that's directly because the compounds responsible for this are detectable by the general population at 5 parts per trillion. And there's enough mixing in our tanks and our pipes out in the distribution system that if it gets out at a relatively high level, there's nothing we can do to turn that over faster except time. And it's really, really frustrating for our customers. And, the industry standard is basically that there's nothing that will erode your customer satisfaction and your customer confidence faster than a taste and odor event. And that is definitely something we learned.
But what I think is a really good question, for sure, what you raise is what other uses and benefits, can this machine, and like Katie said, one thing that was already on our to-do list is look at what we do down at the wastewater side. Maybe we're farming some stuff out we can bring in-house, and then other proactive things as far as monitoring the safety and health of our water. So I think it's a really good question to ask. Well, in addition to taste and odor, what else can we do to improve our return on our investment on what is, a very expensive piece of equipment, and then of course a staff person to support it.
Hey, Barbara, you had a question for Katie?
You mentioned that the lab was short-staffed, so I have 2 questions. How long has it been short-staffed, and will this lab analyst position fill that, or do you actually need more folks?
It's been, so the lab previously had, so currently the lab has 2 analysts and me, the lab supervisor, at the water plant. And previously, there were 3 analysts and a supervisor. And even before that, before restructuring, and I may get this wrong, so Ed, please chime in if I get this wrong. There were 3 analysts, a lab supervisor, and then there was a manager over both labs. Is that correct?
There was a manager over both labs
Right.
when it was more centralized.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and there's also at times been a lab technician. So this will go a long way. We have very, very good staff who are very good at their jobs and very good at getting everything done, and they're incredibly dedicated. So having another person will go a long way. I would say that even if we don't get this instrumentation, we really do need another lab analyst. And I am hopeful that with another analyst, even with the additional instrumentation, that will go a long way towards covering our staffing needs.
So what is full staffed again?
Full staff right now is 2 analysts and a supervisor. And I'm a working supervisor, so I'm in the lab. That, for us, yes.
Yeah, for the capacity of work that comes through, is that like normal staffing? I mean, you know what I mean? Is it two lab analysts, 1 supervisor? Is that normal, or is it 3 and 1?
So I mean, since I've been at OWASA, it's been 2 and 1.
Okay.
But it used to be 3 and 1. Several years ago, they moved one of the analyst positions and converted it into an operator position. And that happened only a few years ago. No, the restructuring was before that. Yeah, and I don't know, that happened before I was here, so I don't know all of the machinations of how that happened and what the theory was, but I would argue that in the time that I've been here, the lab has taken on additional tasks, not just dealing with some of this taste and odor stuff, but we've also really ramped up our cyanotoxin monitoring. We, as a result of the major focus on water quality nationwide, have been doing many, many more customer requested testing, which is a big time effort. I had a sheet at one point that had all of the things that we've been adding as we were working internally of what the staffing needs are, and off the top of my head, that's all I can think of. But we have added additional tasks with a reduced staff, and so.
Jeff, I believe you had a question. Oh, okay. Any, John?
Yeah, I'm not sure who this is for. In one of the assumptions that goes into the preparation of the budget, you note that nutrient removal standards for the Jordan Lake rules have been delayed by the General Assembly until 2024. Are we meeting those Jordan Lake standards now or not?
Yes, this question came up after our last discussion a couple weeks ago on the PFAS issues, and I sent an email out that Monica and Dotson and I had talked about, and we are currently able to meet and surpass those future limits with our current process. So we are currently meeting those standards even though they're not in effect. And we can actually, what we were talking about at that time was, it was in the discussion about the partnership awards, we were going to shoot for 95% of those standards, and we're already able to meet and achieve those standards as well. So we're well below where we would need to be when those would go into effect, given, our current plant loading and things like that.
So we're able to meet them, and we do meet them, right?
We do meet them.
Okay. So this is really not that relevant to the budget in that we don't need to make an expenditure to do that.
No,
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
Actually, those investments were made long ago. We just currently don't operate the plant in that mode, but we can operate the plant in a denitrification mode. We just don't currently do that to avoid. We can actually meet at full capacity of the plant. Those future regulations, investments were made years ago to be able to meet those. But we can operate the plant in such a manner now that we don't, at our current loading, we can meet all those future standards.
Right.
Yanka, you had a question?
I'm not sure who this is for, but with regards to short staff, I know in the lab, are there any other areas where we're short staffed, where the staff has decreased over time, but the responsibilities have increased? And is there a reason why we don't?
There were no requests this year from any of the departments for additional staffing other than the lab. I mean, I didn't hear any that I said, no, I'm not taking that forward, or no, you haven't convinced me. There were no requests for additional staffing other than the lab this year.
I would, before you approve the new HR safety position, I would have put HR in that category, but I think we'll be good.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the board? John?
I promised I would circle back, so,
Yeah.
and apologize for doing so. I guess what we've seen is a view of a bottom-up budget, more or less a bottom-up budget. There may be some, tweaking of it by staff. And I think if, I have some general anxiety about that 5.5% increase. I may be the only one, in which case, I can just stop now. If you share my anxiety, I think it's really hard for us to dig into a budget like this and kind of, come up with alternatives. And I know we're a board that appreciates alternatives, that sort of a approach to decision-making. So one thing we might do is ask staff to come back with a different budget scenario that reflects maybe an aggregate budget that we're more comfortable with, without us going into, line by line trade-offs, allowing them to do that kind of work because they're better prepared to do it. But for us to see what that alternative might look like and be able to hold them side by side, and for us to then sort of marry that into a budget that we all support. So my recommendation, if you have that anxiety, if you don't have the anxiety, blow all that off. If you do have some anxiety, maybe we could come up with an alternative scenario and say, hey, staff, would you please come back to us with a budget that's a 2% increase or a 0% increase, or whatever flavor the board might look for.
Are you referring to a particular graph? I don't think we have I'm looking for a graph that's the total cost.
I'll show you exactly where it is. It's
5.4
it's on 5.7.
and 7.
5.7, that very bottom line, which is the net of the whole budget. Is that right, Stephen?
Yeah, I knew the percentage was right, but.
And then you go over to the far right column. So we're increasing, this is the variance in the proposed budget relative to our most recent forecast for the current year. And we're proposing a budget that's about $1.2 million higher, and that is a 5.5% increase over the current year. And
But.
am I right? Did I misinterpret any of that?
But the difference is the forecast budget as opposed to the budget that we adopted. And I'm assuming that the adopted budget is always going to be higher than the forecast budget.
Not necessarily.
That number's on here as well. So the far right column that John's referring to, the 1.2 million, is comparing the budget, the draft budget for 19 with the forecast for 18. And then move over half an inch or an inch or two, and you see a $900,000. That's 19 budget compared to 18 budget, which was your point, I think, Bob.
Yeah, you're looking at 21.9, then you're looking at 22.8.
And we could debate whether you compare it to the current year's forecast or the current year's budget. I personally prefer comparing it to the forecast. Obviously, that's why I chose it. To be honest, I like some of the assumptions Stephen put at the beginning. It says, look, we got reserves, so we don't need to pad our budget with stuff. We can sort of aim for a realistic budget that is our best forecast of what we would actually plan to spend.
Yeah, two quick comments. One is this forecast needs to be updated, and we're in the process of doing that because this was as of, I believe it was November, 2 or 3, 4 months in, 5 months in. And I had an alternative to your idea as a first step. And that is, so if you look, we can take the forecast line, the far right column, the one that totals 1.2 million, go up a few lines, and you'll see a total for personnel services, and then a line or two below that, a total for operating services. So of that 1.2 million increase, 725,000 of it is personnel. So that's the 4% raise, the 10% health insurance. Okay, and so the rest of the budget is $450,000 more. And as the as an initial step perhaps to what you were getting at, staff could go away and come back with the variances that are making up that 1.2, you know, and give some insight as to why that is. I don't know if that would satisfy your curiosity on it or the exercise, but that's it occurred to me as you were saying that.
No question.
You can.
So I remember looking at the rate increases, and if I'm not mistaken, it's supposed to occur in fiscal year 20. So was this part of the reason why there'll be a rate increase at that time?
Yeah, there's 3 big buckets of expenditures. This 22 million, 7 or 8 million for bond payments, and then the CIP, which for next year, I don't remember what the first year number is. Let's call it 18, 20 million. So any of those 3 components, yes, contribute to what your question.
And we also know from past experience where we'll have more discretion to have really an effect on rates is in the CIP more than the operating budget.
Yeah, and I think I made the comment when we were having the discussions about the personnel increases is the board had a policy decision about being competitive and rewarding the employees. And I said, there's a price tag that's going to go along with this. And my sense was we all understood that. And if we could try to continue that next year, those costs aren't going to go away. It is going to increase the budget. My hope is that we can utilize our reserves sufficiently to avoid any type of increase in the rate structure.
I think our reserves they're not what they used to be. I mean, they're good, but they're not. You know, our reserves have been dropping closer to our targets. So there's not like we have excess. And so we're approaching, that's where my general anxiety comes from. I think we're approaching that time where we're going to have to make a rate increase. Certainly if we did this, unless we borrow from our capital, like Ed said, and there's another way of looking at that is like, you know, okay, we're borrowing from our future to push off the rate increases. And I'm not suggesting that we should take away the raises and the benefits and so forth. I'm just saying we should look at an alternative scenario and say, how do we feel about the alternative and come to the best?
I guess the one question I have is what has been the past budget increases? We only have 2 years here. One was 4, and this one's going up to 5.5. I mean,
Yeah,
hysterical. Historical data would be helpful.
Well, you know, the graph 1 on page 5.9, if you just look at the blue bars, that is operating expenses, you know, on a raw basis without indexing it for the number of gallons. If you just look at the blue bars.
Yeah, but that's on the operating expenses. I mean, I mean, I like to see that graph as total cost.
you're talking about graph 1?
Yeah.
Those blue bars represent cost per million gallons. So
Okay.
So
I'm sorry. Yeah, I got
thought we
that
had,
wrong.
yeah. Well, maybe no.
You're right. All right.
But I was looking at this, and we've gone up in budget year to budget year for the last, I want to say at least 5, between $500,000 and $1 million, you know, budget to budget. So this is not, you know, you're right. It's not new, and it's been going on. And I'm happy. We are happy to go through any exercise that you guys that would be helpful. My only point before is over half, 2/3 of that increase is related to personnel costs. And to make a big dent in that, you would have to just not count on having as high as personnel costs. You know, in this is not only the raise, but the additional position, which, you know, it's not that much, but it all adds up.
For sure.
Yeah, and so I would be interested in an exercise on the operating services. If there's things that can be looked at to lower that 4%, 4.6% increase there. I guess I would be interested in that personally. I'm not as interested in the personnel changing anything there. Hoping that the health insurance costs do go down from the 10%, but there's nothing I feel that we as a board would want to change there personally, at least I think. I mean, sorry, not as a board, I can't speak for everybody, but on the operating services, I'd like to see an alternate.
John, I understand the point that you're making. I'm just,
I just leaned over to Rashir. I said, I think that's quite reasonable. I mean, you know, and Stephen was making this point too, that there's some, we don't have discretion with some of these. We've already approved the salary increases. You know, healthcare is going to be healthcare unless we change the benefits. So, you know, we can set those aside. But I think focusing on the ones that are somewhat discretionary, I think Rashir has kind of a nice scenario that says, okay, let's focus on that. And maybe as an alternative, aim for no increase in that, or board choose a number. I'm not trying to choose the number. I'm just trying to suggest an approach.
thoughts from the board? %1 enough of a target to look at, or?
In my mind, I was thinking 2%, but that's just me.
I mean, my thought is rather than just picking a number, I mean, we can provide you more information. I like the idea of targeting the operating services. I think we could take a stab at presenting what we think are somewhat discretionary from those that are not discretionary. And so rather than picking that number, because maybe it's higher than 2, you know, maybe it's lower. You know, we know from experience that there's not going to be a lot. You know, I think our team's done a remarkable job. What 3 or 4 years ago, we expected 2 or 3 years without an increase, not 6 and possibly 7. So I think our team deserves a lot of credit for doing a heck of a good job managing our resources and making reasonable requests on budget. But if I were you and a board member, I mean, these are very good questions, legitimate questions that we owe you an answer. And Stephen says we certainly want to be responsive to your request for information. But so, and what I think might be most useful is let us provide you under operating services those things that we think are more discretionary, or maybe, you know, we're operating at some level of service now that the board would be comfortable in changing the bar for us on that level of service, and we can let you have a better feel for what orders of magnitude that might be, and maybe help you zero in on some areas where you'd be comfortable a little less of this, and here's a consequence of that, or trade-offs. But, you know, as I said earlier, if we need to, if we're not comfortable with whatever that rate adjustment might be in future years or this coming year, you know, the CIP is going to be another place we need to look at and make some decisions about, you know, investments and priorities and what might be able to defer it or not. But I like the idea of focusing on the operating services and allowing us to provide you more information about where some discretion might lie in those numbers. That's okay.
And just to emphasize a couple of things Ed said, of that $400,000, a big chunk of it, 140 is chemicals and the related materials, lab expenses and things like that, which in fuel, things over which we have very little control. And
Wait, are you saying that there'd be $140,000 more?
yeah, we're projecting a $140,000 increase in chemical costs from this year to next. Primarily
And that's
from
not
price
change in
increases.
dosages,
No,
but
that's
that's the
price
cost of
increases.
materials, so.
So, and there was another one I just saw a minute ago. Now all of a sudden I've
And
lost
energy,
it, but
wasn't there a 5%
it's not,
increase in?
there was,
electricity?
but overall it's not a huge dollar amount. So again, I'm not trying to talk us out of going through the exercise. I was just trying to set expectation.
Oh, okay. Well, that gives me at least an idea of what you're talking about.
So if we're narrowing it down to now 300,000,
Yeah.
that we're trying to whittle away, we may be able to whittle away some of that, but
Yeah.
well, we could, of course.
Yeah, so, and we'll see the, projected rate increase or not for next year. But I'm trying to remember, during the spring, Stephen, do you refresh sort of the 5-year horizon as part of that, or do we do that in the fall?
No, we.
It'll be
we
all
look-
part of, so we'll be able to kind of, I think, John, assess those trends, as Stephen comes back to us with, if this continued, how would that project? And I think that'd be helpful
I
information.
think we need to be conscious of future impacts.
Right.
It's always better to go, in my opinion, incrementally as opposed to having whopping rate increases and catching up.
If I
John.
can jump in, I think there's a danger, it's sort of like a budgeting danger to say, okay, well, we can't touch this, we can't touch this, so let's just focus on cutting this one to zero, because, how others might approach it is to say, well, we can't cut this, so this has to go maybe lower than zero to recognize that, this is something we don't control. So I think it's a trap if we fall into say, well, we're going to set all of this aside and focus on this a little bit and maybe try to make sure there's no increase there. I think other organizations might approach it and say, well, that might be true, so we better dig extra hard on these ones that we could control to get them to balance out potentially some of this. I'm worried about us falling into these sort of traps. But I accept, the idea overall that staff, will come up with some alternatives that we can review, and I think that's the basic win right there.
Okay, I think everybody's comfortable with that approach. Any other questions or comments from the board on this topic? Okay, Stephen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're at item number 6, review board work schedule. Are there any members of the public who want to comment on the schedule? Ed, can you lead the discussion?
Yes, earlier today, Andy emailed out and she put at your place some changes on agenda page 6.2, which is our next meeting, March 22nd, 7 p.m. at Chapel Hill Town Hall. And the main change there is, Mary, that is, so the board can expect an email tomorrow from Simon, is that right? Yeah, our utilities engineer will be emailing the board some information regarding the solids thickening equipment at the wastewater plant, and it'll include a link to a very detailed engineering report, provide the board information about some options that were considered in upgrading and replacing the thickening equipment, and so you'll see that a week in advance before you see an informational report on the consent agenda at the March 22nd meeting. And of course, if you all have questions and would want it discussed, we can certainly move that from the consent agenda to the regular agenda. So again, expect an email tomorrow from Simon with information about that. And if you have any questions or would like it discussed, just respond and we'll put that on the regular agenda. That was the only change at this time to our March 22nd agenda. And then on April 12th, the change there is we want to, as we have in the past, and it was an oversight on our part, is we, at the April 12th meeting, would like your permission to advertise the rates that we'll have at our second May meeting at the public hearing. So it's been our practice each year that before we advertise the rates, that the board will agree that those are the rates we'll advertise. And, as Bob's reminded us before, the board can always decide to adopt a rate lower than what we advertise, but not higher. So that would, again, that should have, that's what that agenda should have looked like when it went out to you earlier, so apologize for that oversight.
Any, Ruchir?
It's kind of a minor thing, but I'd like to change just how we describe on the April 26th discussed draft banking RFP. I just feel like verbiage.
On the
that might be.
12-month?
Yeah, on the 12-month calendar,
Okay.
sorry. I guess we weren't quite there, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Moved a
we
little
got-
ahead.
No, that's right. That's where we're headed next.
Well,
Um,
actually, we got to go back. I skipped some things.
Just renaming that somehow, just because I think this might be a subject that the public would be interested in, and that verbiage is, I don't know, not what I was hoping, or what I would think would draw people to be interested. I don't. So maybe something along the lines of discuss OWASA's, this is way too long, but my point would be something like where we discuss
The criteria,
The
or qualifications
exactly.
you'd
There
be
you
looking for in a, yeah. So
This
yeah.
is why you get paid the big bucks.
Yeah. So yes, we'll make that change. Or further describe it in that way, so community would have an idea of what we're doing and why.
Ruchir, what were you speaking of? What meeting?
April 26th.
Yeah, the April 26th, the last item there, discuss draft banking RFP. This is where we would be discussing, what criteria we'd use to determine our
Oh,
financial.
okay.
Right.
The banking draft, yeah. Any other comments on the 12-month schedule before I go back?
Ruth emailed the board earlier
Yeah, those are
in the
things
week
I
that
skipped.
if the board would be comfortable moving from October 25th, moving it up to the September 27th televised board meeting, our annual report on strategic trends. Because she has a very important wedding to handle in October, and she is always willing to work extra hard to exceed your expectations by having it done a month early.
I think that's fine.
And we know that's one of your favorite reports, right?
I believe that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Ruth also sent out an email about source water protection as a presentation at a future meeting.
Yeah, and I think how we'll handle that is through the NERTS meeting that we agreed, if that works for Ruchir and the board, that,
Okay.
good, we're all on the same page, yeah.
All right, that works. Okay, we had a doodle poll go out on the diversity and inclusion meeting for the board, and the date that works the best so far is Wednesday, April the 4th, but I need to check with Yinka, Ruchir, and Ray. It works for you? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your note. Okay, Ruchir, can you meet on the 4th? At 6 to 9. Okay, well, let's go ahead and schedule it for that night, and then you can do a follow-up with, individually with the consultant. Would that be the same, Ed, as we've done in the past?
I'm sorry.
Can the people who missed the meeting meet with the consultant one-on-one?
Yeah, I think that's been done in the past, and
Okay,
I'm pretty
all
sure Angela would offer
all
that.
right. But
in the
hopefully you
future.
can join us. Okay, all right. Okay, that works. April 4th, 6 to 9 for the third training session with Visions. Okay. All right, Ed, you want to do the summarize the key staff actions?
Yes, sir. To each board agenda, we're going to add a new comment, suggestions, and information items from board members on each agenda. We have some things to follow up, questions that were raised during Mary's presentation on the energy management plan. We're going to schedule a NERTS committee meeting to discuss desirability of having a better understanding of what's happening in our watersheds, whether additional monitoring is needed, and what level of community engagement might be useful. And staff will take some time to work with colleagues and peers to determine when we'd be ready to support that discussion, and then get with John and the committee to get that scheduled. And we'll follow up and answer some of the questions we couldn't answer tonight that you raised on the draft fiscal year 2019 budget, to include information regarding parts of our budget related to the operations that might be discretionary in nature, or that might be appropriate to have a level of service discussion among the board. And it will work to have that as part of the package that you receive and for our next meeting. It is our next meeting, Stephen, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We had scheduled a closed session this evening. Barbara has asked me, we're missing 2 members tonight. Do we want to delay it to the next meeting to try to have all the board members as part of that discussion, or do you want to go ahead with it tonight?
Thanks.
I'd rather do it now, but it's just me.
I don't matter, but I might be gone the next meeting.
Oh, well, that's not going to help. Okay, we'll go ahead. If there's no
I still have actually one quick thing. On the, I was just wondering if the NERTS committee meeting, we already have kind of, there's a TBD for drought response operating protocol. I mean, from when I remember in that meeting, there's really like an additional line or band we were going to talk about. So I don't think that was going to take too long. So I'm thinking we can combine maybe those two.
I think it's going to be too much.
Too much?
I think that will be a lot of information for 1 hour-and-a-half meeting.
Okay.
In fact, we may be.
We
Yeah,
just had a resignation.
we don't know yet.
Clearly not a good idea. All right, withdrawn.
So we appreciate the thought of making good use of everyone's time. But yeah, I think both those topics will be so involved, we'll need a full hour-and-a-half for each. Thanks for thinking.
But you
along
got
those lines.
Ruth's heart really beating fast. Okay.
Yeah, right.
If there's no objection, we'll go into closed session to discuss the personnel matter.